Good morning. Of course, Fat Boy has to come over. Come on. Good morning, Fat Boy. Good morning. Okay, that's enough. There you go with that twitching again. On. It's around the 10th house. Excuse me. 10th house. 10th house challenge. Oh. Coping with rejection and failure. Energy, vulnerability, overall physical tissue, willpower, potential illness, bone marrow cancer, throat disorder. Is learn to trust your own guidance and in the value of contracts. Unless you will follow your intuition. Because you will wait according to whether few and few will approve of your becoming more empowered or insightful than they are. 10th house illnesses resonate with the vulnerability of pursuing one's dreams and ambitions without the support of others. The pursuit of your highest potential, whether in creative expression or in practicing compassion, is a challenge you face alone. When we compromise the spiritual expression of our contribution to life, we want to hide that truth from others. Since we do not want to be seen as having failed at our own lives, we symbolically wear this failure on our body, on our skin. Failing to uphold our spiritual framework can leave us vulnerable to disease that attack our own framework, including the bone marrow. Repressing creativity can affect the throat and trigger eating disorders and TMJ. Finally, all forms of arthritis derive from the need to control change, including repressing opportunities for self-expression. Pursuing your highest potential requires willpower and engaging your spiritual perceptions. And so this house corresponds most closely to the energies of the 5th and 7th chakras. Healing guidance. Rejection and failure are the names we give to feeling disempowered. Until you can believe in yourself without the support of others, you will always be vulnerable to rejection and feeling like a failure. What makes you inclined to reject another person? The last time you rejected someone, what about that person made you feel disempowered? Identify what makes you reject others. Inconsistency, betrayal, lies. The other person's mean. Or does things to trigger me on purpose. I don't want to be around that. Bless you. Identify what makes you reject others. And note how many of those reasons apply to you. Choose one characteristic and commit to changing it. I like that suggestion. 11th house challenge, surrendering to divine. Energy, vulnerability, vitality, potential illness, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and other neurological disorders neurosis, par- paran- paranoia, and other mental and emotional disorders. Huh. Reaching a point of surrender, sometimes referred to as hitting bottom, is among our most frightening experiences. The stress of this journey is to the bottom often manifests in emotional and psychological disorders. In these experiences, none of your ambitions, decisions, or desires the spiritual purpose for these experiences is to otherwise dismiss. The way you see the world colors how you see yourself within the world, and consequently, what you can offer the world. You may well be holding on to a vision of yourself that eclipses your talents, but most likely you have no idea what you are capable of doing or being. Once you are able to surrender yourself in hope and trust to a higher source of wisdom, you open a passageway for a deeper process of empowerment. Because surrendering requires the coordination of your heart and your mind. This house resonates to the fourth and sixth chakras. Healing guidance. Ouch. Ow. Surrendering means letting go of your need to control everything and everyone at all times. Okay, stop. Relax. I'm trying to read. Ask yourself how deeply you fear being out of control of your life. How much do you believe that you can determine the outcome of every event? Do you believe you should be able to get other people to do what you want all the time? Choose one area that makes you especially anxious: financial security, marital stability, career direction, and every time your fears are triggered, practice the mantra, I surrender the outcome to the divine. I surrender the outcome to the divine. What a great mantra. 12th house challenge. Overcoming the fear of personal empowerment. Energy, vulnerability, balance of the psyche and the spirit. Potential illnesses, panic attacks, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. You are continually directed to confront the shadow within, returning like Persephone to the underworld to uncover your archetypes. But your fear of becoming whole by consolidating the fragments of your consciousness can lead you to sabotage your spiritual growth. Opportunities to forgive the past and move on, for example, are stifled by toxic pride or fear of change. We often resist change because we fear that an empowered life will demand more of us than we are prepared to give. The cycle of knowing better but acting otherwise is the most common form of psychological torment that we experience when we fight our own spiritual growth. And so the issues of this house are aligned to both the sixth chakra, which rule our intellectual and intuitive faculties, and the seventh chakra, which regulates our spiritual development. Compromising what you know to be the truth, having a fear of confronting the truth, and using your intellect to deliberately distort the world around you, including the value of other people, is rooted in the shadow power of the 12th house archetype. Psyche. Healing guidance. The only way to break the hold of the saboteur is to face it head on. What fears cause you to shut down? Betrayal. What symbolic imagery or truth can you use to melt down your fears? What symbolic imagery or truth can you use to melt down your fears? Patterns of fear are greater at night and smaller in the morning. So before going to bed, bring to mind what is limiting you the most. It's a tough question. Remind yourself that this is an archetypical experience that you are meant to use to examine why you fear your own potential. Get as impersonal about your fears as possible. Read spiritually inspiring prayers with the intention of calming the spirit within. On waking, invoke your fear, however briefly. For example, I am afraid that I will have to express my opinion in this meeting. I am afraid that I will be criticized. Then follow it with, I owe myself this opportunity. If I face a critical response, that only indicates that the power emerging in me is being witnessed. Above all else, I will represent the power of my spirit fully. Okay, so let's read this. Beginning this new chapter, your chart of origin and your spiritual DNA. The second step in healing specific challenge is to examine the relevant archetype house pairing in your chart of origin. Refer to your journal for information that you recorded when selecting that archetype and any subsequent data that you may have entered in response to questions concerning that archetype. You'll need to use your imagination and your intuition to explore ways in which the relevant archetype may relate to your ailment, especially its psychological, emotional, and spiritual causes, before you move on to the final step of casting a working chart. The people in the following stories began by relating their illness to a particular house of their archetypal wheel, then examined the role of the archetype residing in that house. Parkinson's disease and the puppet archetype. A happily married mother of two teenagers and a high school teacher, Francine developed Parkinson's when she was 40 years old. Francine's health habits were admirable, and her illness could certainly not be blamed on a destructive lifestyle or emotions. Because the conventional explanations for the origin of her illness yielded no answers, Francine decided to investigate her archetypal patterns to see if they might help her understand its cause. As I've said, you cannot use an archetypal pattern to predict an illness or death, but the symbolic associations you hold with an archetype can sometimes release a resource of inner power that can help you heal yourself, even if you previously had no awareness that the pattern in your psyche. You may never have considered yourself to be a hero or a creative wizard, for instance. Yet if you were to realize that you had a strong connection to these archetypes and that symbolic power, your self-image would go through a dramatic transformation. such as such as was the case with Francine, who chose to work with her puppet archetype because it resided in her 11th house, associated with neurological disorders such as Parkinson's. She had originally chosen the puppet as one of her support group of 12 because she loved working with puppets and even had taught her school guidance counselors to use puppets in therapy with students. Youngsters readily identify with the imagery of being controlled by someone else, and the students generally responded by expressing a broad range of emotions when they were playing with puppets. Having witnessed the therapeutic value of working with puppets, Francine was able to work with the puppet's archetype in her imagination as an active way of drawing out her unconscious fears, along with any guidance that could help her heal her illness. As she entered progressively deeper state of relaxation, she imagined that she was herself a puppet. Instantly, she made the association that Parkinson's causes your body to shake uncontrollably, like a puppet that has no power over its own movements. That insight led her to ask, what part of my psyche feels like a puppet on a string? Francine imagined that some aspect of her unconscious was pulling on her strings and controlling her, and that she needed to confront that aspect and cut the strings. As Francine continued this visualization, she imagined that she was dialoguing with the puppeteer, her unconscious, and made notes of every impression. At first, what she wrote made little sense because she was not accustomed to focusing within. As she learned to work on her puppet image on a regular basis, however, she established a rapport with it that she felt spoke to her intuitively. That rapport eventually allowed her to expand from therapeutic analysis to a kind of spiritual self-examination. Then one night, Francine had a dream in which she managed to move her own puppet self to look directly into the eyes of the puppeteer. She realized she was looking into the energy of God. After that dream, Francine felt that nothing in her life would ever be the same, and she had complete faith that she had been given a direction through which to begin her healing process. My puppet dream told me that I needed to become actively aware of what forces were influencing the choices and actions of my life, she said, as in the story of Pinocchio, having redefined what it means to be honest with myself. I was being directed to move forward. That marked a major shift in the way I interact with people. I've always been extremely caring of others, and although this has not been a burden, perhaps it is simply not the way I am meant to proceed. I explained to Francine that we often do not hear our own intuition because the voices of so many other people are in our psyches. These voices are not necessarily negative, but they do tend to be needy, especially if you are naturally inclined to care for others. And if you are filled with the concerns of others, you will have trouble establishing a resonance with your own intuition because you can't hear yourself. Francine was being led into another life cycle in which the next several contracts would demand that she establish a more direct connection to her intuition. She needed to cut the strings that she had unconsciously placed in the hands of so many others and put her life purely in the hands of the puppeteer she recognized in her dream as God. So it is that an illness can come into our lives not because of negativity, but because heaven is demanding more of us. Developing a serious illness can make you cut all unnecessary strings to the needs of those who should now be able to stand on their own. Armed with these insights, Francine made a major emotional turnaround. Her pessimism and feelings of futility were healed, and she is better able to face the changes in her body, even if a physical healing does not follow this spiritual breakthrough. How nice. I like that story. Okay, what archetype did we leave off at? Prostitute. And now we're with queen, which a man can have a queen archetype too, as well, I should say. Besides having, or empress, besides having rulership position in a court, the queen represents power and authority in all women. Symbolically, her court can be anything from corruption to her, symbolically, her court can be anything from a corporation to her home. The image of the dark or evil queen has been largely represented by male authors of fairy tales and folklore as a wicked force. She may also be depicted as prone to hysteria and dark powers, influences, or plots, as in the story of Snow White. Gulliver's Travels presents a benevolent queen who rules the land of the giants, but that is a rare exception. The queen archetype is also associated with arrogance and a defensive posture that is symbolic of a need to protect one's personal and emotional power. Queens are rarely portrayed as having trustworthy support systems. Instead, they are lonely figures surrounded by a court filled with potential traitors, rivals, and backstabbers. Women who have identified themselves as queens in my workshop tend to have these qualities in common, suggesting that were it not for their aggressive personality characteristics, they would be vulnerable to others' control. Challenges related to control, personal authority, and leadership play a primary role in forming the lessons of personal development that are inherent in this archetype. The benevolent queen uses her authority to protect those in her court and sees her own empowerment enhanced by her relationships and experience. The shadow queen can slip into aggressive and destructive patterns of behavior, particularly when she perceives that her authority or capacity to maintain control over the court is being challenged. The ice queen rules with a cold indifference to the genuine needs of others, whether material or emotional. The queen bee is a mixed image. She has the astonishing ability to power the entire hive without leaving her chamber, yet at the cost of enslaving the rest of her community. Films: Joan Crawford in The Queen Bee, Marlene Dietrich as Catherine the Great in The Scarlet Empress, Geraldine Chaplin in The Three Musketeers, Greta Garbo in Queen Christina, Judi Dench in Shakespeare in Love, Kate Blanchett in Elizabeth. Drama: Antony and Cleopatra by Shakespeare. Religion and myth: Mary, Mother of Jesus, later elevated in Catholic tradition to Queen of Heaven. Mob: Queen of the Fairies, and often a trickster who steals babies, possibly derived from the Welsh mob or Gaelic Mav. Anatu, Mesopotamian Queen of the Sky. Anitope, in Greek myth, the Queen of the Amazons. Marisha Ten, Japanese Queen of Heaven. Guinevere, King Arthur's Queen. Fairy tale: Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Shadow. All right, that's it for today. Oh, wait, remember the mantra. I'm going to just say this mantra one more time that I thought was good and I liked, and I think it's a good one to remember. What was it? Let's see here. It was in the 11th house. I surrender the outcome to the divine. I surrender the outcome to the divine.